Uh, we have now to talk about AI and the ethics challenge that is very important, especially in the field of health. Artificial intelligence raises a wide spectrum of ethical challenges that cut across technical, social, and political dimensions. Protecting individuals' privacy and ensuring robust data governance and fundamental, particularly in fields like healthcare, where data are deeply sensitive and highly regulated. The demand of explainability is becoming increasingly important when algorithms operate black boxes. They limit transparency in their informed decision-making and complicate accountability. Issues of digital and economic sovereignty also emerge when organizations depend on external technologies, infrastructures, or vendors, potentially creating long-term strategic vulnerabilities. Ethical concerns include the fears linked to the replacement of human professionals, as automation may gradually shift responsibilities for human to machine, risking both dehumanization of care and diminished interpersonal relationships. AI can also unintentionally reinforce discrimination, especially when trained on a biased or incomplete dataset, leading to an unequal outcome for certain groups. These risks highlight the need to preserve critical thinking and human expertise, ensuring that AI augments professional judgment rather than eroding it. At the same time, the growing impact of AI-assisted decision raises the complex question of liability. When an error occurs, responsibility is distributed across developers, institutions, and end users, but finally, the responsibility is human. Finally, mitigating biases and data and algorithm requires continuous evaluation, diverse datasets, and transparent documentation. Together, these challenges underscore the necessity of strong ethical frameworks, inclusive governance, and sustained human oversight to ensure AI is developed in fair, trustworthy, and socially beneficial way. One of the most significant ethical challenges in AI is the risk of bias embedded in the data used to train algorithms, to train and validate algorithms. AI systems learn patterns from historical information. If these data are incomplete or mostly unrepresentative of people or reflect existing social and medical inequalities, the model will inevitably reproduce these bias. In healthcare, this can lead to systematic underperformance for certain populations, incorrect diagnosis, or disparities in access to appropriate treatments. Biases can emerge from many sources: unbalanced dataset, missing data for minority groups, measurement difference between hospitals, or the use of proxies that do not truly reflect clinical reality. These issues are often invisible during development and only become apparent when the AI is developed and scaled. This is why responsible AI requires rigorous dataset design, clear documentation, ongoing evaluation of model performance across subgroups, and transparent communication of limitation. Without this, AI systems risk reinforcing inequities instead of improving care. Algorithm bias can arise at multiple stages of AI development, and its origins are often complex and interrelated. Bias may first appear in the design of model, where initial assumption, feature engineering choice, or simplification embedded in the algorithm can privilege certain patterns or overlook others. The selection and construction of training and validation dataset play an even more decisive role. If the data are incomplete, noisy, or reflect existing inequalities, the model will inevitably learn and reproduce this distortion. Imbalanced groups such as underrepresentative age range, ethnicities, or rare clinical conditions can cause the model to generalize poorly for those populations, leading to harmful disparities in predictions. The situation is further complicated by the choice of metrics. Optimizing for a single global performance measure may mask significant subgroup errors, creating a misleading sense of accuracy. Technical phenomena like overfitting can also introduce bias, as the model may latch into a spurious correlation or backroom artifacts that do not generalize in a real-world setting. These issues show that algorithmic bias is not an isolated flaw, but the cumulative result of methodological decisions across the entire pipeline. Ensuring fairness, therefore, requires rigorous dataset curation, transparent documentation, again, of modeling choice, subgroup-specific evaluation, and continuous monitoring through deployment. AI systems can unintentionally reinforce or even worsen discrimination, particularly when the underlying conditions of access, data quality, and model design are unequal. One major issue is accessibility. Advanced AI tools often require significant financial, technical, and organizational research, meaning that only well-equipped institutions, populations, or regions can benefit from them. This creates a risk of widening digital divide, where certain groups receive better diagnostics, decision support, or services, while others are left behind due to limited infrastructure, lower digital literacy, or socioeconomic barriers. At the algorithmic level, discrimination may arise when models are trained on datasets to fail to represent the diversity of real-world population. Underrepresented groups, whether defined by age, gender, ethnicity, disability, socioeconomic status, or geographical location, can experience systematically lower performance, misclassification, or exclusion for algorithm decision. These disparities can accumulate silently, making them difficult to identify until they have already impacted large number of people. Moreover, even well-designed models can propagate discrimination in the environment in which they are deployed, reflects structural inequalities such as unequal access to healthcare or biased clinical practice. Addressing these challenges requires not only inclusive dataset design and rigorous fairness evaluation, but also policies to ensure equal access to AI research, transparent governance, and active involvement of affected communities to prevent AI from deepening existing inequalities. AI technologies also raise profound privacy concerns, especially in healthcare fields, as they can drastically expand to the scale and precision with which personal information is collected, analyzed, and exploited. Systems relying on facial recognition, for example, and other biometrics identifiers enable continuous surveillance of individuals across public spaces, workplaces, or online platforms, often without explicit consent or awareness. Such tools can track movement, social interaction, and even emotional states, creating an environment where anonymity becomes nearly impossible. AI can also analyze the language pattern, browsing habits, and behavioral signals to classify and target individuals and groups, inferring sensitive attributes such as political orientation, health condition, psychological traits, or socioeconomic vulnerabilities, sometimes more accurately than the individuals themselves. Even datasets that have been anonymized are not immune. Sophisticated inference algorithms can achieve re-identification by a cross-referencing multi-data source, reconstructing personal identities, or revealing confidential details. These risks are magnified by the industrial scale collection, aggregation, and long-term storage of massive datasets. which increase exposure to misuse, unauthorized access, commercial exploitation, or state-level surveillance. In this context, safeguarding privacy requires strong data governance framework, strict minimization of collected data, robust security measures, and regulatory oversights to ensure that AI technology do not undermine fundamental rights to confidentiality, autonomy, and freedom from undue monitoring. Next, the decision-making impact and responsibility challenges. AI fundamentally reshapes decision-making process. It's a disruptive technology for this decision-making process influence. Introducing both opportunities and deep ethical challenges, as algorithms are increasingly embedded in critical domains, especially in healthcare, but also in justice, mobility, public administration, AI begin to influence choice that traditionally relied on human judgment, contextual awareness, and moral reasoning. The famous trolley dilemma illustrates the kind of conflicts AI systems may encounter. Situation where no option is free of harm, and where an algorithm must implicitly prioritize one value, life, or outcome over another. When such trade-offs are encoded in an autonomous vehicle, triage tools, or clinical decision support system, society must confront the fact that ethical choice becomes written into code, often without transparency or broad public debates. The raise important question: who defines the rules? Which value gives the algorithm? How do we justify decisions to affect human lives? Moreover, as decisions become more automated, there is a risk that responsibility becomes diffuse or ambiguous, split between developers, deployers, and the end users as health professionals. Ensuring legitimate and trustworthy decision-making therefore requires maintaining human oversight, documenting the rationale behind algorithmic choices, and establishing governance frameworks that clearly define accountability. In this context, AI should assist decision-making, not replace the human moral responsibility that must remain central in complex or high-stake situations. This slide shows two side-by-side scenarios involving a car approaching a pedestrian crossing. In the left panel, the car is driving straight ahead toward a group of pedestrians with the old people standing on the crosswalk. A school symbol on the road indicates fatal outcomes if the car continues in the current path, with consequently the death of all occupants of the vehicle. In the right panel, the car has swerved to side by changing direction. It avoids the death of occupants, but consequently engage the death of pedestrians. Both panels depict a moral choice involving an unavoidable accident. In both of cases, 5 people die. But what choice have we do? You train and help decision-maker algorithms in a country where expensive drugs. So it's another example of the decision-making impacts of algorithm applied in health. If we train a health decision-maker algorithm in a country where expensive drugs are not supplied to people older than 75-year-olds. If you use the AI algorithm in France or in other country with no age limitation for drugs, the AI will not propose you to give the best drugs to, for example, 80-year-old patients because this drug is too expensive. So it's show you the ethical challenge in the decision-making implication of algorithms, especially in health. When clinical decisions rely on AI-driven decision support systems, complex questions arise about how human judgment interacts with algorithmic influence. If a physical bases part of their reasoning on AI recommendations, it's become increasingly difficult to determine what proportion of the final decision is genuinely human, and how much is shaped, consciously or not, by the algorithms. The challenge is amplified by the fragmented nature of responsibility in AI-enabled healthcare. The system is designed by a private company, procured and integrated by an hospital, for example, and ultimately used by a clinical at the bedside. In the event of an incorrect prediction, a harmful recommendation, or an adverse outcome identifying who is uncountable becomes far from straightforward. The EU AI Act attempts to clarify this by stating that in high-risk sectors such as medicine, the final decision must always remain human, meaning that legal and ethical responsibility stays with the clinician. However, these principles do not eliminate the real-world difficulties of shared accountability, especially when AI systems exert a subtle cognitive influence or when institutional pressure encourages reliance on algorithm tools. Ensuring safe and ethical AI assist care therefore require transparent system design, clear documentation of AI behavior and limitation, training for clinicians on appropriate use, and robust governance framework that distributes responsibility in a fair and operationally realistic way. The situation becomes even more ethically fragile when considering what happens if a physician fully delegates their decision to AI systems. In such cases, the clinician risks becoming a passive executor of algorithm output rather than an active decision maker, undermining both professional judgment and the safeguard that human oversight is supposed to provide. Full reliance on AI also introduces the danger of automation bias, where users trust the algorithm even when its recommendation contradict clinical intuition or observable evidence. If the physician role is reduced to validating and predetermining outputs, the boundary between human and machine responsibility becomes blurred, and the legal framework asserting that the final decision must remain human becomes difficult to unfold in practice. Moreover, complete delegation erodes the critical thinking, diagnosis expertise, and contextual understanding, all of which are essential for safe and personalized care. This scenario highlights the urgent need for clear guidelines, cultural expectation, and mainly training to ensure that AI support rather than replace human judgment, even when the technology appears highly accurate or convenient. As the AI system becomes more sophisticated and trusted, there is a growing risk that professionals may gradually lose their critical skills and independent judgment, resulting in the form of long-term cognitive dependency. When clinicians or decision makers routinely rely on AI recommendations, especially when these are delivered with an appearance of precision or authority, they may stop questioning the outputs, reducing their engagement with the underlying reasoning process. Over time, this can weaken essential competencies such as diagnostic intuition, analytical rigor, and the ability to detect subtle inconsistencies or context-specific nuances that AI may overlook. This phenomenon is of a progressive descaling, not only diminish individual expertise, but can also undermine collective professional knowledge, as fewer practitioners retain the ability of confident challenge algorithmic guidance. Moreover, an overconfident use of AI amplifies automation bias, where use default to trusting the system, even ambiguous or contradictory situation. In high-stakes domains like healthcare, such dependency can reduce resilience. When the AI fails, humans may no longer possess the full skill set needed to compensate. Preventing this erosion of expertise requires deliberately designing workflows that encourage active oversight, maintaining training in course competencies, and fostering a culture when AI is viewed as a tool for augmentation, not a substitute for human judgment, skepticism, and critical reflections. Transparency and explainability are fundamental to ensuring the AI systems are used responsibly, safely, and ethically, especially in high-stakes environments such as healthcare. When algorithms operate as opaque black boxes, users cannot understand why a recommendation is made, whether the underlying reasoning is clinically sound or the model has been influenced by hidden biases or flawed data. The opacity weakens trust, prevents effective oversight, and makes it extremely difficult to contest or correct erroneous outputs. Explainability, by contrast, provides insight into the key variables, decision pathways, and model limitations, enabling clinicians and decision makers to critically evaluate whether an AI-generated conclusion is appropriate in a given context. Transparency in model design, training data, performance metrics, and subgroup validation further ensure that the system can be audited, monitored, and continuously improved. These elements are not only technical requirements, but ethical ones. They uphold accountability, support patient autonomy, and help maintain professional responsibility. Ultimately, without robust transparency and explainability, AI risks becoming an unchallengeable authority, contradicting the very principle of evidence-based practice and eroding public confidence in digital technologies. Here is a focus about generative AI. Generative AI raises a wide range of ethical concerns that extend far beyond those of traditional machine learning systems. Because these models are trained on vast amounts of online contents, they inevitably absorb and reproduce the biases, stereotypes, and structural inequalities embedded in their data sources, sometimes amplifying discriminatory narrative or generating unfair representation of certain groups. Another major challenge is the phenomenon of hallucinations, where the model produces information that is entirely fabricated yet expressed with the confidence and linguistic fluency. This can seriously mislead users, especially in domains where accuracy is critical, such as healthcare, law, or scientist communications. Generative systems can also create explicit violent, defamatory, or otherwise inappropriate content, sometimes even when guardrails are in place, raising questions about user safety and misuse. Beyond individual interaction, generative AI has the potential to transform the information ecosystem in harmful ways. Its ability to produce realistic text, image, video, or audio at scale dramatically increases the risk of manipulation, political influence, and large-scale disinformations, enabling the creation of deepfakes, fake scientific evidence, or targeted propaganda campaigns. Privacy is also at stake. Models may unintentionally reproduce sensitive or interfering information seen during training or infer private attributes for user prompts, blurring the boundary between anonymous data and personal identity. Over time, heavy reliance on generative AIs can weaken critical thinking and individual expertise. as users may gradually trust outputs without verifying source or understanding underlying assumption. These combined risks underscore the urgency of strong ethical frameworks, careful model design, transparent communication of limitation, and continuous societal oversight to ensure that generative AI support rather than undermine human autonomy, fairness, and trust. For example, a striking example of the unpredictability of advanced AI system emerged with BARD, Google's former generative models. BARD had been trained on a limited set of language and explicitly not on the Bengali language. When a human operator asked it a question in Bengali, BARD was unable to respond. Yet the operator persisted, repeatedly prompting the system in the same language. After a series of attempts, BARD suddenly produced an answer in a fluent Bengali, despite having no prior exposure to the language and no instruction to learn it. From that point, the model was able to answer additional Bengali questions and even translate text from English to Bengali. Remarkably, Google's own developers could not explain how BARD acquired this unexpected capability, highlighting the profound opacity and emergent behaviors of large-scale AI systems that can develop skills beyond those intentionally designed or foreseen by their creators. This incident has far-reaching implications for the governance and ethical oversight of advanced AI systems. BARD's unexpected ability to generate Bengali, despite never being trained on this language, illustrates how large models can develop emergent behavior that even their creator cannot predict or fully understand. Such unpredictability challenges the fundamental principle of control, transparency, and accountability, raising the triggered by specific interaction. If an AI can spontaneously acquire a new linguistic skill, it may also develop unforeseen patterns of reasoning, inference, or problem-solving complicating effort to validate its safety or ensure compliance with regulation. This example also highlights the difficulty of trust calibration. Users may overestimate the model's competence, assuming its reliability intended or a domain where its knowledge is actually unstable or accidental. Moreover, the opaque emergent capacities question traditional assumptions about training data boundaries, suggesting that AI systems may generalize in ways that are poorly aligned with human expectation. Ultimately, BARD's behavior underscores the urgent need for robust monitoring, deeper interoperability research, and cautious deployment practices, as society cannot responsibly rely on systems whose abilities and limitations remains only partially understood. In conclusion, the ethical challenges posed by AI in healthcare reveals that the integration of this technology is not simply a technical upgrade, but a profound transformation of the entire ecosystem of care. AI promises earlier diagnosis, optimized clinical pathways, prediction of complications, and new insights drawn from vast datasets. Benefits that could dramatically improve population health and relieve pressure on the healthcare system. Yet, the opportunities come with equally significant ethical responsibilities. The protection of privacy and sensitive medical data becomes more complex as models rely on massive datasets and increasingly sophisticated inference capabilities. Algorithm bias and unequal representation threaten to amplify existing health disparities if not rigorously controlled. The opacity of many AI models challenges the fundamental medical expectation that decisions must be understandable, explainable, and open to scrutiny. The redistribution of role between human and machine raised new uncertainties around professional identity, expertise, and the preservation of clinical judgments. Moreover, as AI systems influence or even automate critical decisions, the allocation of responsibility becomes increasingly ambiguous, involving developers, hospitals, regulators, and clinicians in ways that current legal frameworks only partially address. Beyond the individually risk, AI also research broader societal and institutional dynamics. Issue of digital and economic sovereignty emerged when healthcare systems depend on foreign infrastructure or appropriate models, potentially weakening strategic autonomy and long-term resilience. Generative AI introduce additional threats from hallucination to disinformation that can directly impact patient safety or public trust. Meanwhile, the risk of de-skilling and diminished critical thinking warrants that technological dependence could erode the very competencies clinicians need to remain effective and uncountable. For all of these reasons, the ethical deployment of AI in healthcare must rest a comprehensive and proactive governance. This includes transparent design process, inclusive datasets, continuous performance monitoring, clear documentation of limitation, especially, robust regulatory oversight, and cultural commitment to keeping human, patient and professional, at the center of all decisions. Ultimately, the promise of AI in healthcare will only be realized if innovation is guided by the core value of medicine: respect for dignity, equity, beneficence, autonomy, justice, and trust. If this principle leads the way, AI can strengthen the humanity of care. If they are neglected, it risks undermining the very foundation of the healthcare system. Thank you for your attention.